I'm Edward Ross and I'm a Scottish comics creator. My latest book is Graphic Novel Builder, the illustrated guide to making your own comics, which is designed to get kids aged about 11 plus into making their own comics, graphic novels and manga. I've been reading and making comics since childhood. As a kid, I devoured comics like Calvin and Hobbes and Peanuts, which had kid-focused stories that really had layers of pathos, philosophy and depth to them. But I think it wasn't until I was a teenager and I read Ghost World by Daniel Clowes that I really started to get gripped by comics. The book deals with teenage alienation, relationships, and finding your place in the world. And it opened up my eyes to the fact that comics can be for anyone, and there's a whole world of comics out there ready for discovery. Around that time, I also started getting into making comics again on my own for my own entertainment, and I found it a really rewarding way to tell stories and to express myself. After university, I returned to making my own comics, turning my passion for film into a short self-published comic called Filmish. I photocopied 100 copies of this book and put them on sale in the local cinema I worked at. And once I'd sold 100 copies, I took the money from that and reinvested it in selling in printing another 100 copies. And from there, my audience grew, and I attracted an audience of like-minded film fans to that, and eventually had the opportunity to publish a book-length version of Filmish with a publisher. Alongside my comics writing and drawing, I've had the pleasure of going into schools over the years to teach comics to young people in primary schools and high schools. Young people seem to really respond to this story of me printing 100 copies and putting them on sale. It kind of sparks like an entrepreneurial spirit in them. I think it makes for them the idea of your creativity more worthwhile when what you've created becomes a real tangible object that they could put on their bookshelf or frame in a frame, put on their wall. But I have met many students over the years, one or two in most classes, who tell me that they can't draw and they don't know what stories to tell. One of the main messages I try to get across whenever I talk to these young people is that when you create something, it should be driven as much as possible by your own passions. That's what I did with my first book. I made it about movies because movies were a real passion in my life and a real interest to me. And I drove all that passion into the comics I made, and that came through to my audience. My readers could sense my passion, and enthusiasm is infectious. So I always ask these students what subject matter really matters to them, what gets them interested and excited, and get them to focus on that and find that interest in the work they're doing. I also like to remind students that the way you draw is a form of expression itself. I encourage them not to think of drawing, their drawing ability as either being good or bad, but that their drawing style is a really important part of the story. Their drawing style is what makes the story more personal and more human, and something that only they could tell. When using comics in the classroom, my recommendation is that you treat them like you would any other book. You can certainly acknowledge that they are a different art form with their own language and ways of expressing, but try not to treat them as a lesser or adjacent form of reading. Over the years, I've actually discovered that comics are their own form of literacy. So there are similarities to word literacy for sure, but also there's an element of visual and sequential literacy to reading comics that can only really be fostered by reading comics. A student who might struggle with word literacy can well flourish when given the opportunity to engage with comics reading and analysis. So when analysing comics in the classroom, you can use a lot of the tools you use to analyse literature, thinking about character, plot, setting, themes, metaphor, and so on. But remember that comics also have a visual component. So here's some examples of what you can think about when you're analysing comics in the classroom. You can think about character design, how a character's appearance and clothes help to reveal their personality and motivations. Thinking about their unique expressions, poses, and gestures and so on that different characters have. You can think about the page layouts and framing. So how does a page or a couple of pages side by side look as a whole, how are the panels laid out on those pages, and then what points of view are used in each individual panel, from close-ups to long shots and so on, and how do these choices make the reader feel. You can also think about the comic's artwork. How does the artist's style contribute to the reader's experience of the story? And what about the tools the artist has used, the art supplies and so on? How does all this come together to create a style and a visual look to the comic that then has an emotional impact on the reader? You can also look at the use of colour or black and white that's used in the comic and how these are used to create a sense of mood and tone. Many comics won't use a realistic style of colouring and instead use colour, or black and white for that matter, to paint a scene and to make the reader feel certain emotions. You can also think about the senses and how comic artists capture things like sound, smell, touch and taste through their drawings, creating texture and sort of sensory emotions in the reader. As you can see, there are lots of ways to engage with comics in exciting and thought-provoking ways, and many more ways than as I've just said here. The key is to kind of be creative with it and to give students space to bring their own insights to bear on the text. In the end, comics are a great way to encourage students to see the joy in reading. Whatever comics they've chosen to engage with, it's your opportunity, whether that's superheroes, funny characters, non-fiction, or dramatic and real-life storytelling, it's your chance to sort of validate their choices and help them engage with the books they're reading, the comics they're reading, through analysis and close reading. Comics can be a powerful tool in any classroom and are perfect for slotting into the curriculum to add a bit of interest to topics that may in other times be met with resistance. For example, I've taught workshops about turning poetry into comics. There's actually a really amazing sort of synergy between the two, and it's a really good way to engage young people in writing poetry and thinking about their choices in poetry while also bringing some of that the comic artistry to the table as well. And I also teach a yearly workshop in one school on using comics to explain complex scientific topics. So overall, comics are a versatile medium and an amazing way to engage students in new ways of reading and learning. Thank you for listening.